Day 154 of the Trump administration, and the president, 41 days after tweeting that James Comey better hope there are no tapes of their conversations, says there are no tapes of their conversations. In two tweets, he said, quote, "With all of the recently reported electronic surveillance, intercepts, unmasking, and illegal leaking of information, I have no idea whether there are tapes or recordings of my conversations with James Comey. But I did not make and do not have any such recordings." Here's how the White House reacted today in a briefing that was, once again, off camera.
What can you tell the American people about why he decided to sort of make the inference, at least at some point, that maybe there would be tapes?
Look, I think the president's statement via Twitter today is extremely clear. I don't have anything to add beyond the statement itself.
I get that the tweet is speaking for itself, but I'm curious why it took so long, 41 days, for this to be laid to rest, and whether the president is recording any Oval Office conversation.
You guys asked for an answer. He gave you one. He said he would have it to you by the end of this week, which he did. And beyond timing of that, I can't really speak anything further.
On the Oval Office recordings?
I'm not aware of anything. I think his statement here is pretty clear.
But I'm asking more generally, just not specifically to Comey.
Again, not that I'm aware of, Hallie.
So no Oval Office recordings that you're
Not that I'm aware of.
Democrats involved in investigating this president and Russia were quick to react.
The president's tweet today raises as many questions as it answers. We still expect that we're going to get a response from the White House. I would hope that White House counsel has explained to the president the seriousness if he answers what the House Intelligence Committee has asked of the White House with anything but the truth. There are a couple of reasons why we will continue to look into whether there are tape-recorded conversations between the president and James Comey. First, because the president himself suggested that there were such tapes. Second, because the president's now denial is not a complete denial. He's only saying he didn't record the conversations and he doesn't know whether there are recordings out there. So we'll continue to explore this, but also because, unfortunately, the president has in the past tweeted things that simply weren't true.
If he does not have tapes, then it looks like he was trying to intimidate James Comey by suggesting that the conversations may have been recorded and then perhaps hoping that Comey wouldn't come forward. Now, the problem here, Chris, is Comey did come forward, and now that makes him all the more believable that he testified under the risk that anything he said to the president at the time could have been recorded and contradicted by what he was saying to Congress.
Now, to that point about the president and the truth raised by Congressman Schiff, the latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll finds just 31% give the president good marks on being honest and trustworthy. 55% give him poor marks on that count. We're also learning about just what DNI Dan Coats told House investigators behind closed doors. A U.S. official tells NBC News Coats said the president was obsessed over the Russia probe and that the president, quote, repeatedly asked Coats to say publicly that there was no evidence of collusion. Also tonight, our Andrea Mitchell confirmed former Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta will speak with the House Intel Committee in a closed-door session. The president also did an interview today with Fox News that will air tomorrow morning. But this clip was just released of the president talking about Bob Mueller.
He's very, very good friends with Comey, which is very bothersome, but he's also we're going to have to see. I mean, we're going to have to see in terms, look, there has been no obstruction, there has been no collusion, there has been leaking by Comey, but there's been no collusion, no obstruction, and virtually everybody agrees to that. So we'll have to see. I can say that the people that have been hired are all Hillary Clinton supporters.
Let's bring in our panel. Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at the CIA and the Pentagon and former chief counsel for the House Intel Committee. Michael Crowley, senior foreign affairs correspondent at Politico. And Mika Oyang, vice president for Third Way's National Security Program and a former staffer for the House Intel Committee. Jeremy Bash, let me start with you because the original tweet was the tweet that launched the special counsel investigation that this president is now attacking. And we should fact check him a little bit. I don't think his smear on some of the lawyers that Bob Mueller has hired is completely accurate regarding political contributions, but we'll check that out. What of the effort to put the toothpaste back in the tube today by this president?
Well, the president's tweet today was very heavily lawyered. He said, "I did not make and I do not have any such tapes or recordings." He left open the possibility that others, maybe others in the White House, made such recordings and that they now possess them. And that's why I think Congressman Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, is very smart to pursue this and really call the president to answer as to whether or not there is any evidence that was either created or later destroyed about what James Comey said.
And let's watch the Comey testimony, because he details exactly what he did in response to that original taunt from the President of the United States, the original threat, I guess you can say, that he had recordings. Let's watch.
So look, I've seen the tweet about tapes. Lordy, I hope there are tapes. The president tweeted on Friday, after I got fired, that I better hope there's not tapes. I woke up in the middle of the night on Monday night, because it didn't dawn on me originally, that there might be corroboration for our conversation. There might be a tape. And my judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
Michael Crowley, a man trying to corroborate tapes that in the end didn't exist. How do you stack up his credibility against a president who repeatedly lies about everything?
It's not a fair fight when you put it that way. And this tweet is really one of the great failures of Donald Trump's adult life. I mean, I think that as a businessman, he was probably successful in bluffing people and making assertions to kind of psych people out, playing games of chicken and getting the other person to back down. And in this case, it just failed spectacularly. He dropped a banana peel in front of his own feet. That tweet led to the appointment of Bob Mueller, whose investigation now is going to broaden into all kinds of things, including allegedly money laundering by Trump associates and possibly touching Trump businesses. And as you note, again, James Comey has a lot of credibility. I mean, Trump is trying to describe him as a leaker and to conflate the fact that he put his account of his interactions with Trump out into the press. He's trying to conflate that with leaks of classified, sensitive information from intelligence agencies. They're completely different. But I think to most Americans, they see Comey as an incredibly straightforward, straight shooter with a lot of credibility. It's just not a fair fight when you match them up that way.
Mika Oying, I want to read you something that caught my eye tonight from the Washington Post's Abby Phillips. She writes, "The incident highlights a new reality for all of Washington, which now must spring into action to bolster or rebuff presidential assertions of dubious origin and with no evidence to back them up. In many cases, the claims have had the opposite effect of what the president presumably intended, feeding into doubts about his credibility, deepening his legal woes, and generating unflattering accounts that dominate the news for weeks at a time." I wonder specifically on the question of deepening his legal woes, do you think if he was trying, Jeremy described the tweet saying that he did not have recordings as lawyered up. Do you think he helped himself from a legal perspective with the tweet today?
I think from the tweet today, he's trying to say that there's nothing there, but it actually makes the earlier tweet all the more suspect. The fact that he tried to intimidate Comey by suggesting that there were tapes. Then this goes to this question of what was his intent? Was he trying to get Comey to shut up? Is that part of a pattern of trying to obstruct the investigation itself?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.